Welcome to our first session in MarketRx. Your revenue isn't lying, but it isn't telling the truth. Today's topic, the Revenue Mirage. Today we're joined by Ohad Arazi to explore how life science CEOs can transition from short-term commercial scramble to sustainable category-led scale. Ohad has served as CEO, president, and board member at some of the most complex digital health and medtech organizations, including McKesson, TELUS Health, Zebra Medical Vision, and Clarius Mobile Health. He's led companies through pivotal moments of growth, reset, and reinvention. And he brings a powerful lens on how to go beyond revenue management to commercial mastery. This conversation is going to tackle a tough truth. Attaining short-term revenue goals doesn't always correlate to building a sustainable growth strategy for outsized market share and valuation. So with that being said, I'll hand it over to your real host, Holley Miller, founder of Gray Matter Marketing. Thank you so much, Holley. Take it away.
Thank you, Rita. Hi, everyone. I'm Holley Miller. Thanks so much for joining today, and hopefully for some of the other insightful conversations we'll be having this week. I founded Gray Matter almost 20 years ago now, after seeing too many breakthrough products struggle to find traction in the market, because most CEOs and commercial leaders fall into the same trap. They think that having a superior product plus sales readiness equals launch success. That's the product adoption lie. Instead, we offer our partners the blueprint to make their product the only choice the market is wired to want. It's called healthcare category design, and it's the strategy behind companies that set the new bar for care and create outsized financial results. We need more innovation to become standards of care, not cautionary tales. That's what makes this conversation so important today. Ohad, you have seen how this legacy sales playbook is still hanging on even in the new healthcare economy. What's striking about your experience, in my opinion, is that you've helped a number of teams transition from what I'm calling reactive revenue to more resilient commercial growth strategy. We're so thrilled to have you kick us off, so let's dive in. To get things started, you've said that sales execution isn't the same thing as strategic clarity. So what's the risk when CEOs conflate the two things? What's happening beneath the surface when companies are celebrating numbers are looking good, but then they don't last past that quarter?
No, absolutely. I'm so glad you're bringing this topic up, because it's kind of a little bit of a hidden truth, right, of the reality of this revenue mirage. I love how you coined that phrase, because there really is a huge difference between good revenue and a strong strategy. And I think that at times we mix them up and believe that our strategy is necessarily working just because we had a good revenue quarter. A good revenue quarter is hugely important. It's just that, though, right? It means that you've executed well to sell and deliver product. A winning strategy is what enables you to hit your revenue target through sustained product differentiation.
Can you tell me a little bit more about what that means in your mind?
Yeah, so sustained product differentiation is what enables companies to really be indispensable to their customers, right? To set them apart from their competitors in a way that their customers consistently value. That can't just be a short-term gimmick, right? It's got to be something that is going to be lasting over time. It's going to be hard for your competitors to replace. And it has to be something that matters to your customers. And I don't know what that is. You have to find out what that is for your customers and then market it as a category defining feature that really sets you apart and allows you to defend your market position and potentially charge a premium for that. Yeah. And when you have that sustained differentiated strategy, your one strong revenue quarter becomes quarter over quarter growth and ultimately year over year growth, right? And so that is what leads to that sustainability that Rita talked about in the preamble. Whereas without it, your one strong revenue quarter might look like your rug is getting pulled out from under you in future quarters.
You make a really great point, Ohad. And what I'm hearing, I think you say, is that commercial success can't just be about effective sales team, but really a company-wide discipline to own your onlyness. And I don't mean to speak ill about any sales reps, but in my experience, sales reps are motivated to hit their number. They don't really care if their colleague hits the number hits the number, they want to hit their number. And so to your point, having a different perspective that everyone buys into has to be critical, right?
Yeah, it's a broader change management exercise. And to me, sales, of course, play a vital role as part of a broader organization to deliver on revenue. But I think it has to come from just selling to actually delivering value over time. And so I think if you really want to replace that revenue mirage with sustainable growth, I would think about how do you take a leap from a capital model, which is kind of sales led, a one-time capital sale, which is much more transactional, to a recurring revenue model. And that transition can be very uncomfortable, but it's also essential. I mean, I think that there's probably many device or drug CEOs on this webinar thinking, I can't do that, right? I sell a thing that's purchased and my sales reps sell it and that's done. That's the transaction. But I'd ask you to challenge yourself and think about ways to deliver ongoing value and then to be able to charge your customers for the ongoing experience you're providing. That could be in the form of a subscription for software that enhances the use of the device or the drug, like a digital companion. It could be a consumable model that augments the device. It could be an engagement app. But I think it goes back to your point around like it's a broader organizational change, right? Because moving from a one-time execution capital sales strategy to some sort of recurring or hybrid model really requires tremendous change management discipline, right? Different comp structure, different support models. It means reworking part of your P&L because you're recognizing that revenue over time. But it does tie back to my prior point of sustained product differentiation as kind of a core principle of your strategy. Because if you have that sustained differentiation, you can get customers to continue buying you on an ongoing basis. They're buying the experience because they continue to see that value above and beyond the initial transaction. And you're increasing your revenue predictability by doing that. I think that's hugely valuable. And again, it goes back to like, how do you avoid that one-time heroic quarter by now having that, predictability. And I would just say to everyone on the call, like, it doesn't have to be all or nothing, right? It can be a complementary approach. It can be a longer change management exercise, but I would say try to find that balance that you have both a capital and some sort of renewable component, recurring component to your revenue profile, anchoring back again on your differentiated competitive strategy.
Ohad, on that point, before we kind of continue, I just want to lean in a second on that. How do you think about the role of the CEO and that role of that, kind of lens and the role of the CFO? Because I can see at times there could be a bit of a battle between, reworking the P&L, but it's, maybe a short-term pain point to really, unlock that long-term growth. So how do you see those two executives kind of partnering or maybe even having conflict about what you're suggesting?
Look, as CEO, always, you have to be the ultimate change management agent, right? If you're going to set a strategy and drive the organization, get everyone on that same rhythm, on that same metronome of going towards the strategy, you have to foundationally drive change and convince everyone with the importance of doing this, and then align the processes and the tools, the comm structures, the incentive plans to make sure everybody is working towards that goal. I think probably your CFO, as an important member of the executive leadership team, has to be on side. Where you might find challenge or tension is back to your existing investors. Whether you're a public company and you're looking for quarter-over-quarter results, like that's a very difficult thing, right, to move from a one-time to capital model because you take a short-term P&L hit, right? You're recognizing less revenue up front and you're deferring that over time. With private companies, that's a lot easier. I can tell you that at Clarius, when I joined, we transitioned the company from a one-time capital model to a hybrid model, and that certainly took time. But I was able to do that with really strong support from our investor base that saw the value in that over time, and strong support from the CFO that was able to find the right levers in the P&L to be able to minimize the one-time hit. So not easy, but I would certainly say as a CEO, you have to have conviction in it. You have to have strong alignment internally, as well as with your investors, your owners, whether you're private or public, to be able to drive that change because it doesn't happen overnight.
Thanks for that. And, you made the point about finding ways to re-engage with your customers, right? And not being kind of a one-trick pony, but finding other ways to support them. The takeaway for me is that you need to be really deeply embedded in your customers' world. You have to really understand their pain points, what keeps them up at night, where there's friction in the workflow. And so showing them that you understand them better than anyone else makes them believe that you can solve their problems better than anyone else. And that's really how you earn their business, right? No one gives you their money because they like you or they like your sales rep. And so when you think about the core of that, it seems like you're saying, look, you got to build a product with sustained You have to build a product with sustained differentiation. You want to be indispensable to your customers by kind of continuing to evolve and deliver that product, whatever shape it takes. And that can change over time as you evolve. But what's next?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, many years ago, Holly, we've known each other for a while. You introduced me to this concept of category success and how do you define a category. And it really starts with anchoring around understanding the customer problem you're solving from. And I think, in healthcare generally, we really have to have this end-to-end view of the unmet clinical need that then allows us to expand from being a point solution to address a broader platform view of what's needed. I know this well from radiology. When the radiology field of AI just started, we were developing AI solutions that kind of solved a corner of a radiologist's workflow. And I think ultimately it wasn't enough to solve one indication because it's one of many things that a radiologist would look at in a typical exam. And I would say that we've really seen the AI imaging domain transform to much more of platform plays. And I've learned from that to think about how to redesign your go-to-market strategy around what only you can solve end-to-end, right? How fast, can you initially grab that solution point and then grow from there from solving one particular problem to really replacing like an entire system or an entire workflow for your customer. That's especially important in today's healthcare landscape where we've seen tremendous consolidation. So providers now are, serving many more care settings, right? Even if, an IDN might own a hospital, they might own a clinic, ambulatory centers, right? So you need to be able to serve multiple care locations. Providers are also under immense pressure from a procurement standpoint to pare down their vendors and protect their margins. So you don't want to be the one that's squeezed because you're just a point solution. And again, not that platform player that's indispensable to their operation. So I think start with the category logic, right? Not the product specs or like kind of worshiping the pipeline of that specific quarter's performance, but rather being very clear, like what category will you define and how will you own that end to end?
And I love that lens. I think in my experience, I've been at this for a long time. A lot of times companies have the product, right? They built the product and they're trying to figure out how do we get the market to like my product? And the most common complaint CEOs tell me is, people think we're a nice to have, not a must have. And I'm curious, given what you said, has that always been the case? Or has that gotten maybe more of a category lifeline after COVID? I think things have kind of had been a little bit changing and maybe you could get away with, kind of defaulting to the old playbook. But it just seems like as a new healthcare economy is really becoming more and more entrenched and some of the dynamics you mentioned are their set courses are not changing. Do you think this is even more important?
Well, certainly since COVID, we've seen that almost all major health systems are in the red. So I think that it just puts so much more pressure on procurement, which in turn means they can't deal with like kind of best in class pet favorites of this or that clinician. They have to think about like, who are my strategic partners from a vendor perspective that are going to go the distance with me. I think usually when you do start adoption of a product, it's a nice to have for most of the market and it's a must have for like that, your key customer, right? And so how do you leverage that and learn to grow from there to become a must have for a broader set of users and really understand your category? None of this happens overnight, right? I mean, usually, most healthcare innovations start with kind of that techie, geeky clinician that works with you to bring your product into the space. And to them, it's very, very valuable. And the others are kind of like, oh, just that geek over there is playing around with that tool. Like, I just want to keep doing what I'm doing, see more patients. Like, I'm under huge, tremendous pressure, and kind of the supply and demand equation, post-COVID. Like you said, it's not only the financial pressures, it's also just we're seeing more demand for healthcare and less clinicians in the workforce, right? So like the clinicians are busier than ever, meaning that they can sustain less disruptions than ever. It's very hard to get their attention to say, hey, try this thing. It's going to improve your productivity over time. And they're like, I'm so busy. Like, just can you leave me alone? I've got a patient right in front of me, right? So like over time, you learn how to work with your KOLs, your early adopters, and to build that broader kind of must have. Through that, I would say always maintain that category lens. Like, what am I ultimately doing that isn't a point, but rather is serving an entire system or broader workflow change? Expand from there, and then try to leverage that position to retain your differentiation, even in an environment where clinicians are under the gun because of that supply and demand equation, and even in an environment where administrators are under the gun because of tremendous P&L pressures and are looking to kind of rationalize their vendor ecosystem, pare down the number of procurement partners they have, and just partner with a few that can really have a bigger impact on their broader operation.
I appreciate that. And I can see how that makes a ton of sense. You really have to find, that pain point you said that if could solve would really create transformative outcomes. So that makes you become a must-have, not a nice-have. It's not an overnight, flip you switch. Do you think that some companies, if they're trying to create a category, do you think that there is a risk of starting too small or too narrow in a particular disease state or application, or to your point, kind of point in the disease process or the treatment care, instead of trying to go too broad? Are there pros and cons in your mind?
That's a great question. I think that's very context sensitive, right? Sometimes you just have to go on a discovery journey where you're starting, you've realized, again, as long as you're anchoring, I think, on a problem that is worth solving, you'll ultimately find other adjuncts that are tied to it, because often just your ability to understand the true need that you're solving for isn't as clear, right? So I think it's not a bad idea to start with a narrower problem, as long as you can understand it, how it ties to a broader solution space, a broader addressable market that you could have an impact for. Sometimes you see that from the get-go, and you're saying, I'm going to knock down all of these elements, but I'm going to start with these 3 and then expand to these 5 and these 10. So I don't know that there's one single answer to that, and I don't know that one answer is better than the other. Start small and grow from there, or start with a big vision and just pare it down initially to have a starting point. It really depends on the context of how much of an understanding do you have of your solution space. But I think as long as you're really focused on problems that are worth solving, that are big, hairy, meaningful problems to the broader clinical community, I think you're going to find that resonance over time.
It's interesting because I feel like, in this healthcare economy, there's, you can't, look anywhere without just hearing and seeing how many big, hairy problems exist, right? And so there's no lack of opportunity to solve meaningful problems. But what I see time and time again, which I think feeds into this kind of revenue mirage, is that companies are delivering kind of incremental product tweaks or kind of feature-based evolution, which might create a small burst of revenue or get you that quarter or maybe 2 quarters worth of, hitting your revenue. Maybe even your pipeline is growing, but that can be a dangerous lens because it's not really meaningfully advancing the healthcare standard, and it's not really solving those big problems that would demand attention, pricing power, integration within the whole system. So how do you think about that with companies saying, well, we do that? Like we're launching new features, every quarter or every year. I feel like there may be misunderstanding the context of what you really mean by solving problems.
Yeah, I mean, if we just go back to the 3 points we tried to convey today. So let's start with, like, when you have a product tweak or a roadmap, try to first look at it through a differentiated strategic lens. Like, is this building sustained differentiation, or is this something that the moat is very shallow and others are going to be able to follow you and cross and be able to do the same? And over time, they're going to do that at a lower price point, because as long as they're integrating latest and greatest technology, they're going to catch up to you very, very quickly. So I'd say kind of that's the first lens of when you think about your roadmap, you think about your last 2 quarters, we're good. Your product management lead comes and says, we've got a great roadmap. We've got like this bunch of features that are coming out. So first of all, is it creating sustained differentiation? Second, is it really creating a overall lock-in effect that is more than just like we paid once for that feature and we're done, but rather that we're selling an overall experience, some sort of recurring element that keeps your customer coming back to you. Right. So I'd say look at your roadmap and look at your last 2 quarters through that lens as well. How much of that is one time? How much of that is recurring? How much of that will they continue buying? And how much of that is going to be dependent on an ongoing stream of value that you can deliver that maybe you haven't even delivered yet, right? The promise of that is part of what keeps the customers coming back to you. And then the third thing is to really think about how does that, is that just isolated to like solving a kind of a widget, or is the sum of all the features that are on the roadmap and the sum of all the features that we've got customers to pay for in the last 2 quarters, are they really coming together to a broader platform play that will make you indispensable? Because I think without those 3 things, the likelihood of the rug getting pulled from under you, either by your competitor that caught up because you didn't have sustained differentiation, by your customer that said, I've already paid you for this once, bye-bye, like I'm done, or ultimately by the fact that, they had to rationalize their procurement and said, you know what, I've just got too many vendors. You're just doing this one thing for me. I'm going to buy that from Cerner or Epic or someone else that has a really big footprint and is doing a lot of other things for me, right? So all of those things could happen. And next thing you know, your next 2 quarters don't look quite as good as your previous 2. And your widget roadmap, doesn't amount to something that is going to be able to lock in that broader competitive advantage, that broader pricing advantage, or that broader importance that you have in the lives of your customers.
That's incredible wisdom, and just you make it seem so simple, so black and white. And I think sometimes we complicate things, and so it's just nice to have a kind of a very easy 3-point plan to execute and a mental scaffold, as you said, to really think through your commercial growth strategy, whether you're launching a new product or you're already in market and trying to gain traction. I guess I'm curious if you put yourself in the role of a CEO. What's one question they should ask themselves the next time they look at a strong revenue number?
Yeah, is this revenue a result of our strategy, or is it in spite of it, right? Because otherwise, your one strong revenue quarter is just that, or is it a culmination of the things we talked about: a sustained competitive advantage, a sophisticated business model that includes recurring components and ownership of an entire category that you define and command? And I think you really have to ask yourself, like, if the answer is no to any of these, then what could I do different? And that's a really hard thing to do, right? Because you're so immersed in the business, right? There's always this, like, are you in the business or working on the business, right? And so it's very hard to think as a leader that's responsible for the month over month, quarter over quarter results to step back and ask those difficult questions about your quarter, challenge yourself, challenge your board to say, I'm happy with the result, but I'm actually concerned about X, Y, and Z. And to be able to do that before kind of the tide changes. I've often thought about this great book by Marshall Goldsmith, who wrote, it's called What Got Us Here Won't Get Us There, right? And that's such a difficult thing to ask yourself, because at any given time, you have to kind of evaluate, like, there's all the things that I've done and they've been great. And like, they're what, has allowed me to have the success and the company to have the success that we've had. Are they what's needed, though, to succeed from this point on? And kind of what are those inflection points that you really evaluate, whether you need to change up what you're doing in order to have sustained growth? And of course, it's in many ways easier to do when you're not succeeding, because then the writing is self-evident that you have to change. And by the way, if you're not going to change when you're not succeeding, then someone is going to drive that change for you, right? Your competitor, your board, right? Your investors are going to step in and say, we need a change here. But it's a lot harder to do when you actually are winning and you have a good quarter. But I think that's what great leaders must do, is always have that very skeptical perspective. And I've often found that, it's hard to do that on your own as a CEO. A big part of what you do is build and curate a very strong leadership team around you. So back to your question, like on your CFO or your COO, as a CEO, you're often a glass half full kind of person. You're kind of cheerleading the company along. Make sure you surround yourselves with leaders that avoid any blind spots, that can help you look at the glass half full and say, hey, we had a good quarter, but like, I'm very worried about these 8 things that to me are mean that either our competitors are going to catch up to us or beat us, that are going to render our results as a one-time success and not as an ongoing strategy, or that we're ultimately going to be replaced because we're just not indispensable enough, too small, in the role that we play for our customers.
I love that. And if I could just sum that up, it seems like you're saying if you want to be a legendary leader, you really have to have the ability to be brutally honest with yourself.
Well said. Absolutely.
Well, great discussion to the both of you. Thank you so much for that fantastic just deep dive into our main topic. For anyone who's listening, we're about to join and start our Q&A session. So a huge thank you to you, Ohad, for kicking us off with such a powerful lens, and for you, Holley, for leading the discussion. Before we open up Q&A, just wanted to let everyone listening just like reflect on this message here, and something that I took away from the conversation, which is in a healthcare economy that's really shaped by noise, I feel like only those who define their market will be heard. So ask yourself this one question: is your revenue a signal of real growth, or just a well-timed illusion? Is it a mirage? All right. So let's roll to the Q&A section of our program.